I have a very important question to ask you. Have you checked out the Generally Spooky Patreon yet? Because if not, why not? We've got oodles of content over there, exclusive episodes only available on Patreon, our Wee Blethers, the chatty, unscripted weekly show where Kieran and I discuss episodes, what's going on with us, and generally have a great time. There's also the Spooky Book Club, where you'll get a chapter a week of a spooky classic. At the moment, we're in the middle of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, and I am dying to know how it ends. As well as all that goodness, joining our Patreon is really what keeps the podcast going. It allows us to keep doing what we love, which is chatting to all of you about spooky Scottish history. You're £75 a month. No, I'm just kidding. You can pay £4, £8 or £12 a month to keep the lights on and keep the creepy cogs turning. So come join in. Search Generally Spooky Patreon or click on the link in our description. Bang! Welcome to the Generally Spooky Podcast.
Welcome. Hello. Thank you for being here.
We talk about Scottish history and Scottish ghost stories and Scottish legends.
Yes, we do. I'm Kieran.
I'm Eilidh.
And Eilidh tells me a story I've not heard before. She's got a script. I don't.
Maybe you could tell.
That's what's going on.
If you're new, welcome. If you're not, welcome even more. Just because I say so.
Just because why the fuck not? Well, it's been a slight break for us since recording the two-parter.
Did you enjoy our Dunrobin epic?
It was an epic.
If you listened, please let us know if you enjoyed it. And if you enjoyed the two-part format, we would love to know, because we're not really sure whether you guys like it or not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we've tried a two-parter before and just the numbers weren't great. We did a two-parter on Burke and Hare way back in our first season.
Yeah.
And we were probably worse then.
Well, maybe it was our staying power that stopped people coming back from part 2.
But yeah, just it seemed like you guys didn't enjoy coming back for a second part. Mm-hmm. So if you did enjoy it this time, please let us know.
Please do.
Equally, if you didn't enjoy it, let us know, because then we'll just make the 4 or 5 hour epic.
Yeah, we will. We'll do it for you.
And we'll do it in 2 parts, and we just won't tell you. We'll just smoosh it together.
Smoosh. Have a lunch break in the middle.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty good to me. Well, I believe we have quite a lot to get through today.
We do. This is a bigger episode than I anticipated.
Speaking of long episodes.
Yeah. This is our once per season folklore episode.
Yes.
Episode 8.
It's what we do. It's been in every season so far.
Mm-hmm. But usually when I do a folklore episode, there isn't a lot of factual information because, you know, it's legends, it's folklore.
You normally struggle because you like getting your teeth into the facts and the history and the records.
I like checking things. Mm-hmm. I like knowing. So folklore, I enjoy reading it myself in my own time, but I almost feel guilty sharing stories with people that I can't verify.
Yep.
I don't know why I do this, but I do.
So it's not usually such a long episode.
No, this is going to be a long one because there is a lot of real people who did actually exist and things that I have been able to check.
Well, that's exciting.
Which is very unusual.
Yeah. You're excited to tell me, and I'm excited to hear it. As are...
Your compliment made me choke. I'm so used to you putting me down. I don't know how to take it.
Well, that's the end of today's episode because Eilidh died. Tune in next week for Ghost Eilidh.
Sorry. I choked on my coffee because you never say anything so nice.
People aren't here for me to be nice. I forgot what I was saying.
Sorry.
We're excited. The listeners are excited. I'm excited. Let's roll some music, let Eilidh calm down, and we'll get started.
I didn't mean it. It just hit the back of my throat.
Would you like to share with everybody what we're talking about today?
Yes, this week we are discussing The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui.
Sounds exciting.
Very exciting. So before we get into anything, Kieran, what are your feelings on Bigfoot?
Ooh, I want him to be real, but I don't think he is. That's where I stand on it.
What makes you think he's not real?
It just seems improbable, and I feel somebody would have spotted him by now, but with an actual camera or something, as opposed to all the weird and wonderful bits of
Well, my counter-argument, Kieran,
evidence.
was going to be that plenty of people have seen Bigfoot.
Well, I know, all over America and the world. So yeah, I personally don't think there's a Bigfoot, but I would really like there to be.
Fair. Well, we're kind of talking about Scotland's answer to Bigfoot this week. The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui, or Am Fairly More.
Yes.
We can cut that out. Unlike most of the other folklore things that we've talked about in the main seasons and our mini-series, which you should totally check out if you're interested in fairy lore, the first reports of this particular beastie first appeared in the early 1900s.
Ooh, that's very recent.
Yeah.
In terms of folklore.
And obviously these are the ones that gained notoriety and reached the press, so people local to the area we're going to be talking about were probably talking about it before.
Interesting.
But it gained traction in the early 1900s. Kind of similar to Nessie. Although people were talking about Nessie before, it was 1934 that the surgeon's photo was released, I think.
Yes, I remember that.
But yeah, surprising.
Oh, that is very surprising. The early 1900s. See, because that seems too post-industrial revolution to have, fairies still about, so to speak.
It's really unusual. I think you're going to struggle with this one, Kieran.
Okay.
Because we're going to get into it plenty, but a lot of the reports and encounters come from people that you would deem scientific.
Ooh. Okay.
But they're reporting what they've experienced.
How exciting.
So you might struggle. We might actually find Kieran struggling to come up with an opinion.
Am I going to get convinced?
Maybe.
Oh my God. What if after this I'm a believer, but then it's no fun on the podcast anymore? It's just,
it would dampen the debate that we have going on here, wouldn't it?
just be us agreeing with each other.
No one wants to listen to that.
No.
No one wants to listen to a husband and wife getting along.
Well, don't come here for that's for sure.
The legends that we're going to be talking about come from Ben Macdui, which is the second tallest mountain in Britain.
In Britain, very cool. The tallest, of course, being Ben Nevis.
I was just about to ask you. I have that in my script to grill you about the tallest mountain in the UK. Do you have any idea how tall Ben Nevis is, making it the tallest mountain in Britain?
4,000 and change feet.
Oh my God, you're really close.
I thought so, 4,362.
4,413.
Oh.
Or 1,345 metres tall.
I knew that.
You did.
That wasn't just a guess.
Because I didn't even think you would know it was the tallest.
Oh, the faith you have in me.
It's just how I've been conditioned over a lifetime.
Well,
don't blame me.
I mean, there's a running theme of the podcast of me not knowing things that I should probably know. But this one I do know, so I'm going to stick that in my pocket.
Keep that for a rainy day. Ben Nevis is in the Grampian Mountains. It's down near Fort William, so the west of Scotland. But Ben Macdui is in the Cairngorms, almost right in the middle of the mountain range.
Okay.
And it's 1,309 metres.
Cool.
1309.
Ben Macdui, I know nothing about. I hadn't even heard of it.
Well, not many people have. It's bizarre. If you're familiar with the area, Aviemore and Braemar are on opposite sides of the Cairngorms, with all the mountains in the middle. And the Cairngorms are a popular skiing spot. So we're back in the Highlands this week.
Yeah.
I know, best place in the world.
If you'd asked me, I would have thought the second highest mountain was Snowdon in Wales.
Yeah, you would think, wouldn't you?
That would have been my guess.
But no, apparently not.
Apparently not. Ben
Macdui is considered a wilder place than Ben Nevis. in terms of landscape, and I think the climb and various different definitions. But both of them are Munros. And if you don't know, a Munro is a classification of mountains in Scotland. And a Munro is any mountain over 3,000 feet.
Cool. Over 750 metres?
914.4 metres.
Oh, well, I got 1 out of 2. That's not so bad.
I had it written down. Yeah. I knew you'd ask. And there are 282 Munros in Scotland.
That's a lot.
A lot. And to give you some perspective, because I struggle just with numbers, the Eiffel Tower is about 1,000 feet tall. So it's 3 of them. 3
Eiffel Towers tall. Mm-hmm. Damn, the Eiffel Tower is tall. Mm-hmm. That puts the Eiffel Tower more into perspective for me. That's wild.
Well, I mean, now I have to check, but...
It's a point of pride in the mountaineering community in Scotland if you climb all the Munros.
Yeah.
As I think maybe John Munro did, and that's why they're called that.
I'm about to tell you why they're called Munros. Yeah, the Eiffel Tower is 1,083 feet.
Damn.
But I had to check, because I wrote it down and then I doubted myself. The Munros are named after Sir Hugh Munro, who came up with the first list of these high hills. And he called them Munro's Tables back in 1891. So not that long ago.
No, not long ago at all.
But fun fact, Sir Hugh never climbed all the Munros.
No?
No, because the list was completed after he died.
Oh.
So he never completed his own namesake.
That's funny. But it was his idea, so he got credit. Well, there you go. That's a very QI question, isn't it?
As of 2021, 7,098 people have bagged all the Munros.
Less than I thought.
Well, I guess these are the people who have come forward and said.
Well, that's true, eh?
The record for the fastest continuous round is held by a man called Donny Campbell from Inverness. And he managed to climb all the Munros, so all 282 mountains, in 32 days.
32 days?
In 2020.
Oh my God. That's insanity.
Yeah.
It's like 4 a day.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the women's self-propelled continuous round of Munros, the record for that is 76 days and 10 hours, and is held by Libby Kerr and Lisa Trollope.
Wow. Good job.
Yeah.
That's good going.
And I think self-propelled just means that you're cycling or making your way between them yourself, rather than driving, from what I understand. I really wish I was the type of person who could mountaineer. Because this has been very enlightening and it's very inspiring hearing about people doing all of this. But there's so much you need to know, and there's so much safety stuff that I just don't know.
I'm the worst type of person. I like the idea of mountaineering. I think I would like mountaineering, but I don't and have never done it.
Is that episode of Bob's Burgers where he just likes looking at outdoor equipment?
Yes, I'm very much going into the outdoor outlet.
My hobby is looking at tents.
Yeah. Well, check out this little burner you could use. Yeah, I'm all about that. Actual mountaineering? Not yet. Maybe.
Maybe one day.
Maybe. That's what I'm going to cling to. Maybe one day.
The conditions in the Cairngorms have actually been described as Arctic-like.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I think this refers to the kind of weather conditions you get there. Because the weather, it can turn on a dime in the Cairngorms and it can get really quite wild. But it also refers to the landscape of the Cairngorms. I never really put it together before because I kind of took the way they look for granted. I have family who live down that way. It's where my mum's from. But the tops of lots of the Cairngorm mountains are really expansive and rounded. They're not jagged peaks.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Do you know what I'm talking about? I'll try and share a photo somewhere, but if you look them up, they're very rounded and very wide. And a lot of them don't really have a noticeable, summit, there it is.
Yes.
And I read that this is because they're so old, that they've been rounded over thousands upon thousands of years.
Oh, wow. I have heard that geology is really interesting in Scotland because it's so old, so that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I'd never, because you look at it and that's the Cairngorms, that's what they look like. But it is unusual for a mountain range to not have these pointed peaks.
Well, I know for me, if I think of mountains, it's like Mount Everest and the Himalayas, where they're all super pointy.
Yeah, but not so in the Cairngorms.
Interesting.
Even though they're so tall.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's also possible for storms and bad weather to catch up to you quite quickly in the Cairngorms. So you do need to be very careful if you're going to climb there, because summer at the summit is very different to summer in different places in Scotland.
Yes.
Now, Ben Macdui is unusual because even though it's the tallest mountain in the Cairngorms, it's not very obvious and it's not really that easy to find.
Oh, that would make it tricky.
Because, like I said, it's right in the centre of the range.
Ah.
So there's quite a lot of climbing and walking you have to do to reach the mountain, and then you have to climb it. And it's not obvious where the summit is either because it's so rounded and it's so open.
Oh, whereas I think Ben Nevis is quite well signposted almost from Fort William.
I think it's easier to find and to spot.
You can just park at the base of it and walk up it, more or less.
With the correct equipment and preparation, folks.
Yep. Yeah, you can't just do it on a whim.
We're going to talk about mountain rescue later, and they get very pissed off when people are climbing it in flip-flops and, T-shirts. Don't be that guy. Until the 1800s, a lot of people actually thought that Ben Macdui was the tallest mountain in Scotland. Because this was before they could accurately check.
Uh-huh.
In around 1846, Ordnance Survey figured out that Ben Nevis was taller because they had better ways of being able to measure mountains.
That makes sense.
Because that was a whole thing that they had to figure out and learn how to do.
Yeah. It would also... You would be inclined that the more difficult mountain is taller, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you climbed both of them, you'd be like, no, that one's definitely taller. Because, I feel so much more tired by the time I get to the top, kind of thing.
Yeah. I read there was actually a plot for a little while, once it was discovered that Ben Nevis was taller, to build a cairn on top of Ben Macdui to make it the taller mountain. But I don't think that happened.
No, there's a Hugh Grant film about that, which I saw on, a Saturday afternoon that was very strange.
Queen Victoria herself even climbed Ben Macdui in her time.
Damn.
Back in 1859, when she was 40, she climbed the mountain.
Oh, shit. Fair play.
Right? And she said, "It had a sublime and solemn effect, so wild, so solitary. No one but ourselves and our little party there. I had a little whiskey and water, as the people declared pure water would be too chilling."
That's much more eloquent than, I was fucking knackered at the top.
Well, they hiked in October of that year. So I would well believe it was super cold.
Yeah, that would be.
Because I don't know, I think we talked about it, that yesterday, or the day before, the first snow fell in Glencoe, and
Yes,
it's
it
October.
did.
So it does get really cold higher up. But I also think it would be really funny if she asked for water and her guides were like, no, this'll sort you out, don't worry about that.
Get a wee nip in you, that'll warm you
Water's
up.
too cold. You know, all of that. The Cairngorm Club, a mountaineering group, actually came into being after Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in 1887.
Oh.
6 avid climbers from the area hiked to the top of Ben Macdui and set off some fireworks to celebrate the Queen. And then the next day, they decided to form the club, which is still active today.
That's very cool.
I like what they're about. I checked out their website, and they encourage mountaineering to promote competence, safety, knowledge, and responsibility of attitude amongst mountaineers, to offer opportunities to engage in that pursuit in company with others, to impart information concerning mountains, to keep under review rights of access to Scottish mountains, and to issue publications.
I like the sound of that.
I like what they're about.
That's some good values to have.
Making them accessible but keeping people safe.
Yeah.
And the rights of access is important.
Yes, absolutely. You want private landowners who own partial parts of mountains be like, yeah, I can't walk here.
And I bring them up because we're going to talk about them later on.
Cool. TBC.
Yes, but they're actually the ones who built the summit indicator on Ben Macdui back in 1925.
Oh.
Because remember I said it's not really easy to find the summit, so they had that built.
Oh, okay. What
That
is
was
it?
them.
Like a little stone monument type thing?
I think it's a little stone thing, but on the top it has a kind of map of the surround, so you look at this little disc and you can see what other mountains you're looking at.
Oh, yes.
I think it's one of them.
I've seen them.
But there's also a cairn on the summit.
There's one of them on Ullapool Hill, which is not even almost a mountain.
It's very much a generous hill.
It's barely an incline, really.
More of a lump. I said it already, but Ben Macdui's almost in the centre of the Cairngorms. And I read a book by Patrick Baker for this episode called The Cairngorms, A Secret History, which I would highly recommend. It's very good. And he describes the mountain really well. He says, it's cloistered safely away from sight, hidden deeply within the landmass of the Cairngorm Plateau. Up close, Ben Macdui's profile is often equally hard to detect, its boundaries uncertain, and its shape morphed into the high ground that surrounds it. It's a geography of unexpected secrecy and concealment, a seemingly counterintuitive proposition, a landscape possessing both altitude and anonymity.
The perfect place for something spooky to happen.
Precisely. That's why I wanted to tell you about the mountain, because it's just so interesting that even without all that, this mountain has this reputation.
Well, it really sets the scene, that, doesn't it? Even with, because I've just seen pictures of Misk Cairngorms. Presumably Ben Macdui's been in some of them, but I wouldn't know it to see it. But that really sets the scene nicely.
The secret mountain.
Yeah.
So this actually brings me nicely to why we're here. The Big Grey Man.
Yes, we're not just talking about a mountain.
Now, the descriptions of this creature, which I hesitate to even call a creature, are really bizarre. And I want to tell you from the off that there aren't any confirmed sightings or visual evidence of this thing. The legend of it endures, but encounters with the Big Grey Man seem to be about feelings and experiences rather than seeing something concrete and being able to capture that.
Okay.
So it's been reported to be thin, broad, tall, hairy, dark, grey and shadowy.
Me when I'm hungover?
A lot of people have compared it to a Yeti or a Bigfoot, which people are more familiar with as an image. But yeah, there's more photographic and visual evidence for Bigfoot than there is of the Big Grey Man.
Interesting. There's even more intrigue built with that, isn't there?
Most of the time, people report feeling the presence of something when they're on the mountain. They aren't alone. There's something following them around. They'll hear the crunch of footsteps when no one else is around, because you can see pretty far when it's not foggy.
Oh, of course, yeah, there's not trees and things.
No. They get really uneasy. Some people are overwhelmed with emotion. One person we're going to talk about felt himself being driven towards the edge of a cliff.
Ooh.
As if something was making him want to run off the edge.
That's creepy.
So there's lots of feelings.
Yeah.
What do you think so far?
Very unusual, because I've read things about the Yetis in the Himalayas and what happens to you at that kind of altitude, but it's not that high in the Cairngorms.
We are going to talk about precisely that later in the episode.
I thought we might. Well, I'll save it for then, but very spooky.
So I'm going to get into the encounters people have reported of having with the Big Grey Man. And I feel like this might sway you, because I have... How many encounters do I have? These are just the ones that I found, by the way. So it might not be all of them. Yeah, I have 17 encounters to share with you.
17, you say?
Yeah. They're not all super long.
17 coffins worth of encounters?
I didn't even put that together. Oh my god. This is why you're here.
See, I told you I had value, like you said I didn't before we recorded.
Excuse me? I have never said that. You cannot prove that I ever said that. Which in a court of law is the same as not saying it. Yes, 17.
Well, that's a lot. That's enough to make you wonder, I think.
And I think when you hear some of the encounters, the people who have had them, you're going to roll your eyes at. I just know.
Okay.
But others, you're going to be confused. I just know it.
Okay.
So, I'm going to start with the most famous encounter. And then we're going to go through the others kind of chronologically of when they happened. But the weird thing with this is when they happened is usually always different to when it was reported, sometimes by decades. So people have had these encounters, haven't wanted to tell anyone, and then come forward years later.
That's always a weird one, because it, in one way, makes it more compelling, because they obviously experienced something real enough to be embarrassed or ashamed about it, that they didn't want to tell people.
And scared.
but 10 years is a long time to remember something and have it change in your head over time as you
True.
replay it, and it just changes like a little bit here and there. So it puts more weight that something happened, but less weight in what specifically happened.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, in my mind, the most famous encounter is this first one, and it comes from a man called John Norman Colley. And he was a really big name in Scottish mountaineering, and mountaineering globally even. He was a big deal. He was born in 1859 down in Cheshire. And it's a bit iffy, it's quite horrible, but his family were wealthy because they had invested money in the cotton trade in the United States.
Oh.
So they made their money off slave labour.
Again.
It's not nice, but I didn't want to leave it out.
No.
However, they lost everything when the American Civil War broke out because that had a huge impact on the cotton trade. Fields of cotton might be burnt or like stolen by soldiers passing through to sell it.
Yep.
So huge demand, but no cotton. So Colley's family lost a lot of money, but they had been wealthy. He was a very smart cookie. He wasn't just a mountaineer. He was also a professor of organic chemistry.
Ew.
So he knew his stuff.
Yes.
And he was so good at what he did that he was actually involved in the research that led to the very first X-ray picture being taken.
That's badass.
That was his work.
Wow.
With other people, not him alone.
No, of course.
But he was part of that.
Smart cookie.
Right? But it seems like even with all that, his passion was mountaineering. That's what he really loved. And he started climbing around 1886, so when he was about 27. And one of his first trips into the mountains was up in Skye.
Okay.
Magical place. Now, if I remember rightly, he visited initially to go fishing with his brother, but got aggravated because they couldn't find places to fish.
Did they check the sea?
I mean, I would hope that they saw it was there.
Or do you think they went up a mountain? Because that's not very smart.
No. Regardless, the fishing didn't go well, but the climbing did.
Good.
They really enjoyed it. He tried climbing Skirnan Gillan. Skirnan Gillan is another Munro. This one is 966 metres, or 3,170 feet.
That's a lot of feet.
And it was only climbed officially for the first time in 1836.
Wow.
Again, officially.
I was about to say, but officially.
But looking at this mountain, in comparison to places like Ben Macdui, this one looks like an intimidating mountain because
really?
it's very rocky and it's very jagged. So it looks intimidating. And Colley didn't manage it at first. He didn't even manage second. He failed to reach the summit twice. And it seemed like it really aggravated him. But it doesn't look like failing to me because it looks really difficult. I don't blame him for not being able to get up there.
No. Maybe that's what made his love, though. If he just done it first try, he'd be like, oh, that was fine. Sweet. That was cool. But because he had to work for it, he was like, actually, yeah, I want to do this again.
Fire in your belly.
Yeah.
Skirnan Gillan is the closest Munro to a place called Sligachan, which we've talked about before in an extra episode over on Patreon.
Yes, we did.
We talked about a ghost car.
Yeah, the Sligachan lights.
Yeah. But it was at Sligachan that Colley would meet his best lifelong friend.
Oh,
a man called John Mackenzie.
That's nice.
Now, initially, Mackenzie helped Colley climb Skirnan Gillan, finally reaching the summit. He helped him do it. And Mackenzie did this because he was a mountain guide.
Oh.
He took people from the Sligachan Hotel into the surrounding hills.
Very cool.
And I think he was the first British professional mountain guide.
I was just thinking, even now, it's not common for that to be your job.
No. But he knew the hills better than most people. He'd been climbing since he was about 10. But he was a crofter by trade.
Oh.
And it was something that he and Colley had in common, that neither of them were that bothered about money. Like, they didn't want to make money climbing. They just did it because they loved it.
Yeah, nice.
They shared a passion for mountaineering. I found a great description of Mackenzie that I want to read to you. The stalker's cap, the loose jacket, and the knickerbockers, which he wore, suited the man. They seemed to grow out of him. He had the characteristics of the Highlander, the courtesy joined to self-respect that are the heritage of the clans. His accent to the end smacked of the Gaelic speaker. His features were strong and embrowned by weather. He wore the old style of short beard, whiskers, and moustache. Always alert, always cheerful, he was the perfect companion, but it was when the mist came swirling down on the wet rocks that his true worth was known.
That's a cool description.
Right?
I like that when the mist comes down and you're getting lost. That's when he comes into his own.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a cool dude.
Right. It seems over the course of Mackenzie's life, with how often he led people into the mountains, he guided thousands of people into the mountains in Skye, and there was never a single recorded accident.
That's impressive.
Which is quite spectacular.
Yeah.
He really knew what he was doing.
Fantastic.
And them meeting and starting to get along basically started a whole climbing career for the two of them. Colley spent many summers in the Highlands and a lot of time in Skye, staying at the Sliggan Hotel. And they made lots of first ascents of mountains together.
Wow.
They created new routes. They were a good team. They actually discovered the Keogh together in 1899, which is an enormous boulder on the Corlagan face.
Oh.
They climbed it in 1906, and Mackenzie was the one who named it because Keogh means boob in Gaelic.
I thought you were going to say like it was the name of his wife.
No.
Maybe his dog.
No, it means breast. And when you look at the boulder, you can see it.
Is it a bit boobular?
It's a bit booby, yeah. It's also massive. It's really like terrifying. I can't believe people have climbed it.
Well, that's hilarious.
I thought you'd enjoy that.
I did.
Colley actually helped to map the Coolin Mountains in Skye.
That's wild.
Which was a big deal because it was really difficult to make accurate maps or measurements. And he got it pretty damn near.
Yeah.
All the way back in early 1900s.
That's wild. You don't think, or I personally don't think, about the first routes made in mountains in Scotland because they're so well trod and the paths are well known and they're all quite well maintained as far as I'm aware. So it's funny to think about discovering a new route up a mountain.
Well, this was them. That's what they were doing. Apparently, Colley had a photographic memory.
Well, that's useful, isn't it?
Yeah, so he could tell you the tiny details of a climb that he did years ago.
Wow.
If you were interested in going. He could tell you about like specific hand and footholds he had used.
Wow.
And could remember things in minute detail.
That would make a good guide.
Mm-hmm. No, this wasn't the guide. This was Colley.
Oh, that's more bizarre. Can you imagine talking to someone? Like, oh, I heard you're into mountaineering. I'm going to go climb this hill. Oh, yeah, I climbed that too, like 20 years ago. See, when you get to this specific place, this is where you put your hand, because the one on your left hand's a bit loose. And then you get there, you're like, how the fuck did he know that?
It's wild, isn't it?
That is wild. You almost wouldn't believe him.
No, until you went.
Until you went and saw he was correct.
Now, Colley climbed with other people besides Mackenzie, who was the mountain guide. Mm-hmm. He was close with a lot of the other big names in British mountaineering during that era. One of these people was Albert F. Mummery, and he's the one who invented the Mummery tent, if you know anything about mountaineering. It was an old style of tent that was lightweight, so that you could carry it with you. It looks very basic. It's a cloth tent. And Colley was heartbroken when Mummery and another climber called Geoffrey Hastings and two Gurkhas, Raghubeer and Goman Singh, were killed in an avalanche on Nanga Parbat, which is the 9th tallest mountain in the world in the Himalayas. They were killed. And Colley actually wrote a book about the expedition. He was touched so deeply, called From the Himalaya to Skye. So he knew a lot of these people, but he was deeply impacted by the dangerousness of the hobby, the passion.
Did Colley ever go to the Himalayas?
No, I don't believe so. He climbed across Britain and Europe, and he had climbed with Mummery and Hastings in lots of different places. The reason Mummery and Hastings died was because in 1895, no one had officially climbed a Himalayan mountain.
Okay.
So that's what they were there doing. Nanga Parbat is 8,126 metres tall. So it's no joke.
Unreal.
But I don't think Colley had ever done it.
Yes. Which if nobody else ever had, would make sense.
Well, yeah, this was new.
Yeah, you'd have to have a certain type of will and spirit to want to do that.
And remember, this is an era where like Brits are saying it's never been done.
Yeah.
You need to bear that in mind, that they're travelling to like what was British India and going into, because Nepal was closed to foreigners at this time. So they were going through Tibet, which I think the British had influence in.
Yes.
So they're going into land that they're not wanted in and saying they're the first ones to do it. It's all a bit iffy.
Yeah.
I am bearing that in mind. Nanga Parbat I had never heard of before, but it actually has the nickname Killer Mountain.
Oh.
Because so many people have died, it's really dangerous. There was a really awful expedition in 1934, a German one funded by the Nazi Party, which is always fun.
Nice.
But at least 9 people died, including 6 Sherpas who were leading them up the mountain. Which is why I don't like that, we're the first. It's, well, the Sherpas are leading you.
I know.
Anyway, one of the surviving Sherpas, Ang Tsering, only made it back after managing to last a whole week on the mountain for the storm that had killed them all to end.
That's insane.
And I read that, quote, "For sheer protracted agony, this expedition has no parallel in climbing annals."
Oh.
Unquote.
Oh no. I saw there's a documentary called 14 Peaks, where a guy whose name I've forgotten climbs the 14 peaks of the Himalayas, 14 highest peaks of the Himalayas. So he climbs that one.
Terrifying. But I want to explain, this is the kind of caliber of mountaineering that Colley is a part of.
Yeah.
He's within this community and he's a big deal in this community. And unfortunately, he felt the loss of his friends really keenly.
Yeah, that's a shame, isn't it?
It's very sad. I was saying Colley didn't just climb in Scotland. He travelled quite a lot. He actually went to Canada at one point, trying to find the Hooker and Brown Mountains.
Oh.
Which, according to legends, they're supposed to be the tallest mountains in North America. But no one can find them.
Oh, that's intriguing, isn't it?
I won't get too into it, but it is a strange story that I had never even heard of before.
No. I have questions. I'll save them for the blether.
Okay. Colley retired in 1929, but he continued spending his springs and summers in Skye. And I believe he was still getting out and about and climbing at this point. But unfortunately, Mackenzie died in 1933. And it seems to have truly broken Colley's heart to lose him. One person described it as, "John was more than a friend to him. One would almost think he was his other self, and his death was a blow from which he never seemed to fully recover."
Yeah.
Which is just so sad.
Always upsetting.
And Colley wrote Mackenzie's obituary, which must have been really hard. I think it got published in the Cairngorm Club Journal, which is why I brought them up. They released journals and issues. Now, neither of the two men ever married. Colley lived alone, and Mackenzie lived with his sisters, his niece and his nephew on their croft in Skye, which he built using the money he had made as a mountain guide.
Oh, wow.
But I do wonder, when I was reading everything, I do wonder if they had a romantic relationship.
You wonder.
I have absolutely no proof for that. I don't know, but...
You just wonder.
I just know that people weren't very accepting. So, neither of them ever married. They're really close, that they had all this in common. Not sure.
Couldn't say, but definitely a possibility.
Yeah. When World War II broke out, Colley ended up staying in Skye, rather than going back home to London.
Very smart.
Because it was safer, with all the bombing.
Yep.
And he stayed at the Sligachan Hotel, which I mentioned. And he commented in letters to a friend how empty the place was.
Yeah.
Because no one was travelling. And in the letters, it's pretty clear that he's depressed at the outbreak of war. He's worried about how bad it's going to be and how widespread the carnage is going to be. In 1942, he was in pretty bad health because he had fallen into a loch while he was fishing.
Oh,
and
no.
He came down with pneumonia.
Ooh.
And he's in his 80s by this point, so that's not good.
That's not good at all.
He died in November of that year. And according to his obituary, he was thinking and talking about John Mackenzie in his final days and hours. He was in his mind. And he was buried beside Mackenzie in a graveyard near Struan in Skye, as were his wishes.
That's a shame.
Right? And there now you can go visit the bronze statue that was built of the two men in Skye.
Oh, wow. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. There aren't many pictures of Colley, because he really hated getting his picture taken. But I did find a couple, and weirdly, he looks a lot like your Uncle Bill.
Really?
Yeah.
who is an avid miner as opposed to mountaineer.
That's your Uncle George.
Oh, so it is. Oh, I'll just cut that out.
Yeah, he looks a lot like your Uncle Bill,
That's strange.
I think.
Yeah. There you go.
So I'm hoping the reason I've gone into Colley's backstory in as much depth
Yes.
is I'm trying to paint the picture of an experienced, confident, knowledgeable mountaineer.
Okay.
He knows what he's doing. He's well travelled. He's climbed mountains all across the world.
Does he perhaps have an encounter you're going to share?
Well, you have to remember that this episode is not called John Norman Colley.
No.
Although it could be. He's a very interesting guy. In 1925, Colley addressed the Cairngorm Club, which I told you about.
Yep.
In his speech, for the very first time, he told everyone present about an experience he had had while climbing Ben Macdui,
Interesting.
all the way back in 1891.
Oh. So he's a decades later.
It took him over 30 years to share this story with the climbing community. What follows is the first recorded account of an encounter with the Big Grey Man. I was returning from the cairn on the summit in a mist when I began to think I heard something else than merely the noise of my own footsteps. Every few steps I took, I heard a crunch, and then another crunch, as if someone was walking after me, but taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of my own. I said to myself, this is all nonsense. I listened and heard it again, but could see nothing in the mist. As I walked on, and the eerie crunch, crunch sounded behind me, I was seized with terror and took to my heels, staggering blindly among the boulders for 4 or 5 miles, nearly down to Rothiemurchus Forest. Whatever you make of it, I do not know, but there is something very queer about the top of Ben Macdui, and I will not go back there again.
Well, that's spooky.
What do you make of that?
Big, giant footsteps. That's ominous.
Mm-hmm. And remember Colley's reputation. He has a whole climbing career behind him. He's a respected figure in the community. He's also a scientist.
Yep.
And he's come out and presented this to the Cairngorm Club.
I wonder what the reception was.
Well, it really captured people's imagination. It kind of went wild. It was reported in local papers and it kind of exploded from there. And there was lots of people who thought he was mental.
I wonder how raging he was at that, because he's obviously kept it to himself for 30 years. Like I said, out of possibly embarrassment and shame and things, and not knowing what people will think of him if he reveals it. And then he reveals it, and all his fears come true, that it goes widespread and everyone's calling him mental.
But not everybody did.
Not everybody, but there's people who are. That must have been upsetting.
Surprisingly, one of the things that his account did was lead to many other people coming forward for the first time, saying they had experienced the same thing.
Oh. Curious. My interest is piqued.
Right?
Somewhat like a mountain.
So the following accounts that other people have given, I'm going to tell you in the order of when the encounter happened, not when they reported it.
Yep, that sounds good.
Because it varies.
Yes.
So Colley's was the first that was reported in 1925.
1925, but it happened in 1891.
Yes.
Got you.
So that's what we're going off. I hope it's not too confusing. I thought this would make it simpler. Hugh D. Welsh was the next person to have strange things happen to him on the mountain.
What is it with Hughes and mountaineering?
In 1904, he was climbing with his brother and said that they heard, quote, slurring footsteps as if someone was walking through water-saturated gravel, unquote, near the top of Ben Macdui. I don't think I've ever heard the phrase slurring footsteps before.
Me neither.
But it's very descriptive.
Yeah.
Like really wet gravel. I can imagine exactly what that feels and sounds like.
Yeah, that kind of like sloshing, stony sound.
Yeah. Both of the men felt frequently conscious of something near us, an eerie sense of apprehension.
Ominous feeling.
Mm-hmm. Footsteps.
Footsteps again.
But they don't see anything.
It's interesting that the two of them heard it as well. Mm-hmm. That's always makes for stronger evidence in my mind.
I remember how wide and expansive and empty the summit of Ben Macdui is. So it's incredibly creepy.
Very creepy. I wonder what it could be. Do you? I'm jumping ahead, but do you have theories?
I have theories.
I'm excited to get to the theories.
I have theories for you. Some of them are going to make you angry.
Okay.
George Duncan was next. And he wasn't just a mountaineer either. He was a lawyer.
Okay.
So another traditionally respectable source. Which, you know, it sounds a bit mean to say because you can trust people who don't have these jobs. But I feel like from a skeptic's perspective, that's compelling.
Absolutely.
In 1914, he saw a tall figure in a black robe.
Oh, death vibes.
Very different to other reports and pretty unique as far as big grey man encounters go. He shared his experiences with the Scotsman newspaper in 1941. So again, nearly 30 years later.
Mental.
But he identified the scary figure he saw as the literal devil. That's how scared he was.
Oh, man. That would mess you up.
I cannot imagine coming away from something like that and being convinced I have seen the incarnation of evil. I have seen the devil.
Imagine if it was me it happened to, and I'm out mountaineering, and I come home having had that happen to me. Like, how was your trip? Did you get to the summit? Like, yeah, it was fine. What happened? Nothing. Don't worry. Don't ask.
If it was genuine, you're a changed person.
Yeah, I think so. That would mess you up. It goes really well with the first description you read of Ben Macdui, of the isolation and the expanse and everything. So to then feel these things by yourself, or just with one other person.
Creepy as hell.
Terrifying.
Now, I'm not sure exactly when this next encounter happened, but I looked into the guy who reported it, so I have a kind of rough idea of the period.
Was he a doctor? That's the theme.
No, he was a scientist.
Okay.
He was Alexander Mitchell Kellis, and he was similar to Colley. He was a scientist and an experienced climber. He was from Aberdeen, and he conducted a lot of research into how high altitudes affect the human body.
Oh, that's interesting.
His work is part of the reason we know that if you're climbing super tall mountains, you should use oxygen.
Yeah.
Like, he's the one who looked into that.
Interesting.
Because you don't just know these things, they have to be figured out and tested.
Yep.
So that was him. And he was climbing Ben Macdui with his brother, so again, there's someone else there. And they saw a giant figure. And they saw this figure coming towards them as they got close to the summit. Which is another feature that comes up a lot. A lot of the encounters happen near the summit of the mountain.
Yeah. Which again is tall, but it's not that tall, I don't think.
So Alexander said that he saw this figure reach the actual summit, and they saw it walk around the cairn that's there. The cairn is about 10 feet tall, and he saw that the figure was the same height as the cairn.
Ooh.
And then the thing just disappeared. They saw it descend into the Larry Grew Pass, which is like down from the mountain, and it just disappeared.
Just disappeared. Oh, I'm so curious. What could it be?
Well, I believe this must have happened sometime before 1920, 1921, because Kellis died in June of 1921.
Okay.
So it must have been before then, which is why I put him here. But he was only 53. He was an interesting guy. He died of a heart attack in Tibet.
Oh.
It's quite tragic. It seemed like he was doing too much. Like, he pushed himself too hard. He had been hiking and climbing Kabru, which is one of the Himalayan mountains. And he didn't get much rest before heading towards Mount Everest.
Oh, no.
Because he was travelling there to meet the 1921 British Mount Everest reconnaissance expedition.
Wow.
Who were trying to find a way to scale Everest for the first time.
Yeah.
Which would make it the first time a Brit had done it. And like I said, Nepal was closed to foreigners. So that's why Kellis was in Tibet. Because that was the only way you could reach the mountain. And he was supposed to be part of the expedition to go up Everest, but he died before even seeing it. Oh. He was a day's hike away.
Heartbreaking.
And he died.
Oh, man. It's insane.
So again, that's how good a climber he was.
Yes. Here he was seeing a 10-foot tall
beast
figure. Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like I don't want to frustrate anyone with all these tangents, but I'm trying to sort of show you they weren't playing at mountaineering.
Yeah. Could have been like a big deer with something on its antlers.
Standing on two legs.
Well, not on two legs, but that'd be a sight.
Well, just that's what they see.
Yeah. Oh.
In 1920, Tom Crowley, the former president of the Murray Mountaineering Club, so a big deal, reported seeing, quote, a tall figure, grey, undefined, and with pointed ears, long legs, and finger-like talons on its feet, approaching him from behind, unquote.
Well, that would make you double your pace, wouldn't it? Record-breaking summit time with that thing behind you. Mm-hmm. See, that's straight to disbelief for me.
Yeah?
Because it's too specific to be like, oh, that's imagination.
He was the president of the Murray Mountaineering Club, though.
Also president of the Mental Murrays Club.
Okay, you don't like that one. I have others. In 1923, a climber called Dr. Ernest A. Baker released a book about climbing in the Highlands. Mm-hmm. And he talks about an eerie feeling on Ben Macdui in this book.
And what does a baker know about mountaineering, you ask? Well, Eilidh's going to tell you.
Well, unfortunately, that's all I have on his encounter. I tried to get a copy of the book and I couldn't get one. But he's talking about it in his book. So he's recording it for all the world to see.
Yep, he's prepared to publish it, as opposed to tell it in a pub.
Yeah. After that, it was a writer called Joan Grant who had an encounter with the big grey man in 1928. But she talked about it 30 years later in her book, Time Out of Mind.
Crazy that so many held on to it for so long.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, how long could you go without thinking about it? If it was as startling as some of these descriptions have been.
I guess you would just try to pretend it didn't happen if you were that scared. If I don't think about it and I don't talk about it, it didn't happen. Her encounter was different to the others we've heard about so far. Because according to her reports, she got charged by a horse or a creature that she couldn't see.
Ooh.
She heard hooves pounding towards her, but then couldn't see anything. And she felt like whatever was there was bad, unfriendly, hostile, and she was terrified by what she'd experienced.
That's unusual.
Right?
Because you can definitely hear direction. If it was, say, a deer or a stag or something.
That sounded like you said hear an erection.
Hear direction.
Yeah.
So if it was charging towards you, past you, away from you, I think you'd be able to tell that.
Well, once we're going to talk about that later, about why that might not be the case.
Okay.
Now, Joan Grant was someone I had never heard of before this episode.
It's one of my friends from school's mum's name.
This isn't the same Joan.
Probably a different one.
This Joan wrote pretty extensively about reincarnation.
Oh, okay.
She wrote several books, and she became pretty famous in the 1930s. Her mother was supposedly a psychic. Her father was a scientist. She reported seeing ghosts a lot when she was a child. She was born in 1907. But she learnt initially that everyone must see ghosts and they just ignore them. That's just normal. It's not just me. This is what everyone does. Because they had staff working in their home. And she saw a lot of adults just ignoring them as if they weren't there because they were the staff. She said, oh, well, that's normal. So people must do the same with ghosts. If you see them, you just ignore them like the staff. And it was only when she got older she realised she was the only one seeing them.
Yep. God, just ignore them. They're the staff.
Yeah.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
That's interesting, though.
Right? She believed... I'm going to make you roll your eyes here, I just know it. She believed that she had been a priest pharaoh in a past life and had developed the ability to remember all of her past lives over thousands of years. And she referred to this technique as far memory.
Cool.
I knew this was going to get you. I did warn you that there would be ones that would convince you and there would be ones that you wouldn't like.
This is one of the latter.
Yes.
Was she the Avatar? Come on now.
If you haven't watched Avatar The Last Airbender, you totally should. Yep. Not the movie, the TV show. But I know you're rolling your eyes.
They're actually facing the back of my head now.
But I want you to listen to what her principles were that she lived her many lives by. Okay?
Her many lives, yes.
Yes. Here they are. There are 4. 1, that every individual is entirely responsible for their behaviour and for their reaction to circumstance.
Very nice.
2, physical age is irrelevant.
I like it.
3, labels of rank or class or nationality or race or creed or sex are so transitory that in the long run they are trivial.
Very nice.
And 4, character, which has nothing to do with intellect or skill, can evolve only by increasing our capacity to love and to become lovable.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Right?
Excellent values or tenets for life.
Like she's not perfect.
No.
I like what she's about.
Yeah, I get behind that.
Right. So I know that you don't like the whole reincarnation thing, but... And she was kind of an oddity in the 30s, considering class didn't matter and race didn't matter.
Well, to think that having grown up with staff is quite something.
Mm-hmm. And obviously it was easier for her to live this way because she was coming from that position of privilege that she could choose to live this way and had enough money to get by. But yeah, different.
I like that a lot.
Not what you'd expect.
No.
She was married several times over the course of her life. During World War II, she opened up her large home to friends and family away from London.
Very nice.
So they could get away from the bombing. And later in life, she found that she could read other people's past lives.
Ooh.
And she could tell them all about it. So that's what she did. She did that in France and England and all over the place. And she died in 1989.
1989, okay.
Yes. So I have to ask.
Yes.
What do you think about past lives and reincarnation? Like, seriously, what do you think?
If they do happen and the Buddhists were correct and you can be reincarnated, I don't think you can communicate backwards.
Okay.
I think that seems
So
unlikely.
you wouldn't know?
No.
It might happen, but you wouldn't know about it.
Yes, you would just need to have faith that it happened. But her knowing that she was a
Priest Pharaoh.
seems unlikely. And seems a little bit big-headed almost. Oh yes, I used to be someone who was terribly important.
But what if, I'm just doing this to piss you off, she was a priest pharaoh.
Okay.
And that's why only she could do what she did. Because she had the relevant skills. She learned them as a priest pharaoh. Now she can still do it.
You're just trying to piss me off, aren't you?
Doing nothing of the sort.
Seems unlikely. And, if I don't see why the priest pharaoh would have been able to learn how to do that. They were just a person existing with a status and title befitting their role. It's just all shite, basically. I'm pussyfooting around it.
Well, I'm just saying magic built the pyramids, Kieran, so this is obviously real too.
I'm going to quote that and make it my ringtone.
Please don't, because that's not what I actually think.
Magic built the pyramids. Magic built the pyramids. Magic built the pyramids. It's my alarm in the morning.
No, unfortunately, slave labour built the pyramids.
Yes.
I would get a past life reading.
Would you?
I would do that.
There is an effort currently happening over on Patreon to get me to go to a psychic.
It's not. It's happening. I just need to find the right person who won't get upset when you just savage them with your disbelief. I'm just trying to find the right site. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
We're going to post it over there. It's decided.
Yeah, but
I just need to find the right psychic to do it.
There's a group effort going into this. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, I would get a past life reading. I would do it.
Fair play, fair play.
And I don't rule out reincarnation as something that could be true.
Yeah.
I don't really know either way, really. I don't have an opinion solidly on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm. Fair play.
Because part of me thinks that so much about Buddhism is right about just how you should live your life and how you should treat other people, that if they believe in reincarnation, I'm inclined to believe them because they're right about so many other things.
It might not just be Buddhists who believe in reincarnation. I'm not sure.
Hinduism, maybe?
Possibly. Some of the religions of India and elsewhere in the world. But Buddhism is the one I know of.
So yeah, that's Joan Grant.
That's old Joan. Joan the
Very
psychic.
old Joan.
Very old Joan. Did she do a past life reading of the Grey Man?
I don't think so.
Couldn't hold his hand.
Well, she was scared. She left.
That's true.
She didn't like it.
Packed up her notes.
After Joan, it was Wendy Wood who encountered the big grey man. And she wrote about it in her book, The Secret of Spey.
Oh.
And that's Spey, S-P-E-Y. That's the area. Now, if you're listening, there's a chance you've heard of Wendy Wood, actually. She was a pretty famous campaigner for Scottish independence.
Oh.
Even though she was born in Kent, in England.
Interesting.
She fully supported the independence movement. She was one of the founders of the National Party of Scotland in 1928.
Wow.
Which brought together lots of different nationalist movements that existed at the time under one umbrella. And this is what came before the SNP.
Interesting.
The National Party of Scotland became the SNP in 1934. I'm hoping we can talk about it more next summer in the series I have planned.
Ooh.
But there was a huge surge in support for Scottish independence after World War I.
Yes.
And Wendy was really vocal in her support of the movement. In 1932, on Bannockburn Day, which is June 23rd, Wendy led a group inside Stirling Castle, and they tore down the Union Jack to replace it with the Lion Rampant.
Wow. That's badass.
Mm-hmm. In the 50s, she protested against the adoption of the title Queen Elizabeth II, because she argued that Scotland never had an Elizabeth I. So why was she Elizabeth II of Scotland?
Interesting. Fair play, fair play.
Because we had Mary, Queen of Scots, and then King James.
Yes.
Scotland never had a Queen Elizabeth I.
Oh. That's a good point. Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
In the 60s, she presented to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland on the subject of independence.
Very nice.
And throughout her life, she campaigned for other causes too. She fought for Irish independence. She fought for recognition of the concentration camps that the British used during the Second Boer War.
Uh-huh.
She supported Indian independence, which didn't come until 1947.
Yep.
1947? And in the 70s, she conducted a hunger strike fighting for Scottish Home Rule.
Wow. Badass lady.
Yeah, very badass. She was also on the children's show Jack and Ori, which you might have heard of if you're of a certain age.
Nope.
She read stories on Jack and Ori.
Oh, there you go.
But back to the big grey man.
Yes, she obviously saw something spooky as well.
Yes, she was approaching Ben Macdui up the Larry Grew Pass, which I told you about, when she heard a really strange voice on the air. And she believed it was speaking Gaelic.
Wow.
Which is pretty creepy.
That is pretty creepy.
But she described the voice as having, quote, gigantic resonance,
Ooh.
unquote. Which to me sounds kind of booming.
Yeah.
But not necessarily loud, more reverberating.
Yes, it would kind of come at you from all sides. Oh, pardon me. Kind of come at you from all sides.
Like a thick noise.
Yeah. Somewhat envelop over you.
Yeah.
Leave you a bit confused. Maybe of just, what I mean, a random voice on the wind would do that.
Speaking Gaelic.
Ooh.
Now, she searched for the source of this voice. I don't know if I would search. I think I'd be gone.
Yep.
But she couldn't find any source. She couldn't find any reason for it.
Curious.
And then later, she heard footsteps.
Oh, she also heard the footsteps.
The same that other people have reported. But she couldn't see anyone. But she really felt as if she was being followed, and she didn't like it.
So interesting.
She even thought initially that, which I think is quite smart, she thought she was hearing her own footsteps echoing back to her.
Yes.
Which is fair. That is something that happens.
Yep.
But she got really freaked out when she realised the footsteps that she was hearing didn't match the rhythm of her feet.
That would be concerning.
And she fled the mountain when she realised that it couldn't be the echo of her own footsteps.
Yeah. When we started this episode, I was wondering what person the big grey man could have been. If it was once some sort of wild man living on the mountain.
How very gilly-do of you.
Well, exactly. That's what I had in my head, but this is much more strange.
Right?
Much more peculiar than some weird man living up the second highest mountain in Scotland.
Yeah. The next encounter we have is from a man called Captain Hugh Rankin.
Captain?
And the main thing I saw about him was that a lot of people deemed him as an eccentric. So here's his little, initial paragraph from his Wikipedia entry for you.
Okay.
I haven't changed anything. Soldier, sheep farmer, and noted eccentric.
Huh.
who was the president of the British Muslim Society in 1935 for a short period.
Oh.
Now, he converted to Islam initially, and then later converted to Buddhism. And I don't know if this is the reason his contemporaries thought he was eccentric.
That's just what I was about to say. Like, is that it? Was that his
seems
only
a bit insulting.
Eccentricity? Weird.
He was born in Tunisia, and then he worked in Belfast. Then he joined the army and was shot by a sniper.
Ooh.
So he had to leave the army. And then he was a sheep farmer in Australia for a while.
Oh.
So he got around.
Yeah.
He served during World War II. This was when he was shot. And this made him really lose faith in the political system of his time. It actually pushed him into the arms of communism.
Oh, wow.
Because he saw the death of war. And it made him really hate the political system as it was. He described himself as a red militant communist.
Full blown, card carrying.
In 1965, he claimed to be the only baronet living on social welfare and said he would take any job except butlering because he said, "I hate snobbishness." In 1972, he wrote his own entry in Who's Who. Remember we saw a copy of the book in Leith Hall? He wrote his own entry and it was 4 times longer than Margaret Thatcher's, who was Prime Minister at the time. She was a baroness, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Hugh had a very similar experience to Wendy in terms of Big Grey Man. He was on Ben Macdui and he heard a strange voice in the wind as well, just as she had done. But the voice he claimed to hear wasn't speaking Gaelic. It was speaking Sanskrit.
Oh.
Which is an ancient language from the Middle East. That's what he heard.
Well, that's interesting.
Now, he goes on and he explains a bit more about his interaction, and there's a theory about what the Big Grey Man might be kind of tied into what he says. So we're going to touch on it later. But for now, you just need to know that he heard Sanskrit and that he had converted to Buddhism.
Well, that's interesting, hearing Sanskrit.
Yeah.
But that shows because he would know what that sounds like.
Assumedly.
But then maybe when
he was just making it up.
Well, that's true. But who was right? Were they both right between him and Wendy? Yeah, if Wendy heard Gaelic and he heard Sanskrit, were they both correct? Or did they each hear the same thing, but interpret it differently?
It's confusing, isn't it? I will touch on, again, his theory as to what the Big Grey Man is, which might explain it. Like why they heard it in both languages.
Okay, he has his own theory.
Kind of. He has his own understanding of what the Big Grey Man was. But we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Donald Stewart was next. He was a stalker, like a hunter, local to Ben Macdui. He lived in the area. And in 1937, he claimed to hear strange footsteps inside his lodge.
Well, that's more unusual.
Having been on the mountain.
Followed home by the Big Grey Man.
Inside his house.
Ew.
And I couldn't find anything more on that or about Donald. And it frustrates me because I want to know everything.
Yeah. I need more information.
He heard strange footsteps inside his lodge.
Creepy, because you have to imagine it's not very big.
Well, no. Certainly not so many rooms that you wouldn't know who was in your house.
Yeah. Spooky.
R. MacDonald Robertson was next. He was a folklorist. And he wrote about hearing the crunchy footsteps of the Big Grey Man. And he wrote about his encounter in his book More Highland Folktales in 1964.
Oh.
But he had his encounter in 1940.
Okay, so that's like 50 years we've spanned now.
Yeah.
I wonder, because as a folklorist, he would know what to look out for. So I wonder if that influenced what he heard.
Maybe, I'm not sure. I couldn't really find much about him either. I don't know if he was local to the Highlands. I tried to find his book where he writes about the Big Grey Man. But the copies of More Highland Folktales are super expensive. But I managed to buy his first book of Highland folktales.
Oh, yeah.
Reasonably cheaply. But I couldn't get the second one.
Interesting.
So I bought the first one in case he mentioned it, but he doesn't in that one at all. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think because he thanks, in that book, he thanks a lot of Highland people and Highland locals for helping him write his book and informing his book. So I don't know. Maybe he wasn't local.
I'm not sure.
I'm really not sure.
But more crunchy footsteps.
More crunchy footsteps. Now it's 1942, and we've reached an encounter had by another renowned mountaineer.
Okay.
A man called Sid Scroggie.
Fantastic name.
Well, I tell you what, I think more people should know about Scroggie because he's incredible, frankly.
Yeah.
He was born in Canada, but he moved over here really young and grew up in Dundee. And his father died in World War I. Scroggie served in World War II. And he was climbing mountains from an early age all over Scotland. He had a real passion for mountaineering and just the mountains generally, being in the mountains. Since he was already an avid climber at the outbreak of war, he joined the Lord Lovat's Scouts when war broke out.
Okay.
Which is a ski mountaineering regiment.
Wow.
I didn't know that existed.
No.
And I'm pretty sure they trained in the Cairngorms.
That would make sense. You'd have the most snow.
Yeah.
For the longest. Oh, that's badass.
Right. In 1945, so right at the end of war, Scroggie was fighting in Italy, in the mountains there.
Yep.
Horrendously, Scroggie stepped on or was too close to an explosive mine.
Ooh.
And the last things that he remembered were the Italian mountains and the bright blue sky. Which was poignant because Scroggie didn't just lose his right leg in the blast. He lost both of his eyes.
Oh, no.
Following this accident, Scroggie was completely blind and he had to learn how to walk again.
And he only had one leg. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's horrendous.
I know it happened to a lot of people during the war.
Always horrendous, isn't it?
Horrible to hear about, especially because his great love was climbing mountains.
Yeah. Oh.
So what did he do?
Persevered anyway. Mountaineered with a guide.
He kept climbing mountains.
What a guy.
He didn't always have a guide.
That's badass.
He kept doing it. He was taken to a hospital in London to recover from the accident. And it was in London that Scroggie learnt to read Braille. They taught him there. I think he was at King's College or New College down there. While he was still in hospital, another soldier who was recovering there remembers being there when Scroggie was there. And he heard racket in a different ward nearby. And it was so loud that this soldier went to check it out and see what on earth was going on. And he went into the ward that Scroggie was on and saw him basically holding court. So he was telling all of these stories and jokes and everyone was laughing so hard. That's what the noise was.
Oh, wow.
He was just that type of person.
You've got to love that spirit.
Yeah, he was just that type. He had that way about him.
Fantastic.
After recovering in London, he went back to Dundee. But he didn't let his injuries stop him from doing what he loved. He taught himself Greek.
Wow.
He wrote and published books and poetry. And he kept climbing. He made more than 600 blind climbs.
600 blind climbs?
Yep.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm. At one point, he's reported as saying, "I can do without my eyes, but I can't do without my mountains."
What a guy.
Mm-hmm.
So presumably he didn't see the Grey Man.
Well, we're going to get to it. He had a real passion for climbing his entire life. In 2000, a cairn was built in his honour in the Sidlaw Hills, which was rare for a climber who was still living. And he climbed to the top of the hill they built it on, even though he was 81 by then. He climbed for the unveiling of the cairn.
Wow.
And in 2001, he was given an honorary degree by the University of Dundee.
Very cool.
What I thought was interesting was that he spoke a lot about how he didn't like the idea that mountains were like achievements, physical achievements. Mm-hmm. He said that they shouldn't be arenas for feats of mental or physical endurance. He felt that mountains should be places of beauty and contemplation and mindfulness rather than just something to tick off or something to like push your body to the edge with. He didn't subscribe to that idea.
I like that a lot because I get exposed to the other idea much more often.
Yeah, it's a lot more common.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of him on top of this mountain, and they unveil it by, I don't know, taking its cover off, and everyone claps and goes like, wow, looks great. And just everyone's suddenly going, wait, what? If he's a bit of a jokester.
Yeah, he seems... He never took himself too seriously, but he took his passion seriously. But he died in 2006, unfortunately. I think he was 87.
It's not bad going.
Considering what happened to him. But what about the big grey man? Scroggy wrote a book about the Cairngorms, which was published in 1989. And he was very interested in the legend surrounding the big grey man. He was quite taken with it. Back in 1942, Scroggy claimed to have seen a tall figure when he was climbing Ben Macdui. And he started feeling really uneasy when he noticed that the figure wasn't leaving footprints.
That would be concerning.
So this is almost the direct opposite of what so many other people have reported.
Yeah.
Because he sees something with no footprints.
Oh, that's true, eh? Instead of hearing footsteps without seeing anything. Curious. Always Ben Macdui, too.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's the big grey man of Ben Macdui.
I wonder if there's other grey men in the Cairngorms.
I thought it's such a funny coincidence that all of the stories in this episode have been about Ben Macdui. I'm like, well, that's what we're here for. Scroggy said that the figure merged with the blackness, and he felt so uneasy that he left the area.
Wow.
He didn't want to be there. Now, before you say it, he wasn't blind at this point. This was in 1942.
I assume so.
His accident was in 1945.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if he was there and this was part of his training, because they were training in the Cairngorms.
Yep, that would make sense.
Because 1942, it is wartime.
Yeah.
So he may well have been part of the army by this point. So I think that's why he was there.
That would make sense. And I wonder if, seeing he merged with the blackness, that implies he's on the mountain very early or very late.
Mm-hmm. Or in bad weather.
Or in bad weather. But he's having to push himself as part of his training.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he subscribed to like a more mindfulness,
Maybe.
appreciating the beauty thing. Because he'd had to push his body to the limits and all that good stuff.
But Scroggy was a confident climber. And this made him extremely uncomfortable. He didn't like what he saw.
Spooky.
Right. Next, we have a man called Peter Densham. And in 1945, Peter was working with the Royal Air Force Mountain Rescue Service, which is what existed before what we know as the Scottish Mountain Rescue.
Oh, okay.
It might sound strange, but the war, like he was doing this during the war rather than being out fighting. But the war was part of the reason that the Mountain Rescue Service was created.
Oh, really?
In the first place. Before 1943, there was no official mountain rescue service. If someone you cared about was lost in the mountains, you had to organise a rescue party yourself.
Wow.
Which could take days. You know, if it was before phones.
Yep.
You just have to go around and ask people if they'll come and help you.
Not a superb system.
No. But during the war, World War II, so many planes crashed in the mountains and hard to reach places that the RAF Mountain Rescue Service was created.
Wow.
To respond to all of these accidents, to try and save the people who crashed into the mountains.
I wonder why that happened.
It was like navigation systems failing and bad weather.
Oh.
A lot of the time. We talked a little bit about it in the Dunrobin episode. Because the plane crashed en route to Iceland. It's a similar issue. In 1942, a plane crashed into the top of Ben Macdui and it killed everyone aboard.
Oh.
And I think I saw photos or I saw articles talking about how there's still remains of the plane on the mountain.
Really?
You can go up and see like one of the engines. It's still there.
It wouldn't get removed, really, would it? It'd be too difficult.
Well, yeah, when your priority would be taking the bodies off the mountain.
Yeah.
But there are lots of Scottish mountains that have this same story. Ben Macdui isn't unique. This happened all over the place.
Oh, crazy.
So so Peter was working with the RAF Mountain Rescue Service in the Cairngorms.
Wow.
In 1945. And while on Ben Macdui, he reported hearing phantom footsteps.
Here we go again.
Now, this is a person who would be very familiar with the mountains,
Uh-huh.
the Cairngorms in particular, because he's working and rescuing people from them. So for him to hear something that startles him is quite compelling.
Yeah. Because he would know the regular sounds to identify an irregular sound.
Yeah. He heard these footsteps and he got himself into a proper panic. So much so that he was running around and he got far too close to a cliff's edge and nearly went over.
Oh no.
But then he felt like something was there that wanted him to fall.
Ooh.
Something was urging him over.
That's very unusual.
Which I teased at the beginning of the
You
episode.
did indeed.
Peter said, I tried to stop myself and found this extremely difficult to do. It was as if someone was pushing me. I managed to deflect my course, but with great difficulty.
Oh.
How scary is that?
That's so scary.
That's sinister.
Yeah.
He even reported feeling strange pressure around his neck.
That's also really weird.
And that's when he ran.
Yeah. Nope. I suddenly got Sam from Lord of the Rings running with all his frying pans clattering.
Yeah. Terrifying.
Very terrifying. It's all very sinister.
Mm-hmm.
There's not the same pleasantness there was with the ghillie doo
No, I would say not.
in our folklore series with the devil pushing off a cliff. Watch out for the big grey man.
Mm-hmm. Now, Peter was actually with one of his friends, Richard Frere, when they had another encounter with the big grey man.
Oh.
So Peter has two stories.
Oh, I swear everyone else didn't go back, did they? Oh.
Few people did.
Or
if they did, it didn't happen again.
yeah.
So Peter and Richard's encounter happened later in 1948. So it's 3 years after.
Oh no.
Here's what happened to them at the cairn on the summit of Ben Macdui.
Uh-huh.
And this is Peter talking. I was surprised after a little to hear Frere apparently talking to himself. Then I had the impression that he was talking to someone on the other side of the cairn. I went around and found myself joining in the conversation. It was a strange experience which seemed to have a psychic aspect. We talked to someone invisible for some time, and it seemed we had carried on this conversation for some little time, when we suddenly realised that there was no one there but ourselves. Afterwards, neither of us, strangely, could recall the purport of this extraordinary conversation.
That's left me a little bit lost for words. How bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a 10-foot tall cairn, isn't it?
Yep.
So you wouldn't know what was going around the other side. Huh. That's peculiar. I'm compelled by him having two experiences.
Well, even just in that story, if you disregard what happened to him before, he's watching his friend Richard have this really weird conversation where he's talking to himself. He goes over to see if he's okay, and then he starts doing it.
He just joins in the conversation.
And then they both finish and they can't remember what they were talking about.
There'll be a lot of nervous laughter coming down from that mountain.
Yeah, big time. We're going to talk about a possible explanation for this that I found. Peter doesn't talk about it, but it's something I came across in research, which might explain it, or explain some of it.
Uh-huh.
But his friend Richard reported feeling a really strange presence on the mountain that he couldn't describe and he couldn't understand.
Yeah.
And at one point he remembers hearing an intensely high singing note.
Strange.
Mm-hmm.
Very strange.
But later, when they were in their tent for the night, even more strange things happened.
Weirder things happen at sea or up mountains.
They heard and felt something moving not far from their tent.
Uh-huh.
So Richard looked out to see what it was, and he claimed to see a large, broad-shouldered and brownish humanoid creature that must have been 20 feet in height. And he said it seemed to swagger as it moved around the camp, emitting an air of insolent strength.
We should just zip it up again. Nope.
It's like that bit in Jurassic Park where he tries to hide in the toilet and so shuts the door to protect himself, and it just does nothing, just decimates the whole stall.
What was that? Nothing.
Nothing, don't worry about it.
Nothing.
But that sounds more like a Bigfoot to me.
Yes, that's very footish.
Sounds like a foot.
Yep. I think
Sounds like a squatch.
We got as a squatch.
But imagine looking out your tent at night
I can't even.
and seeing that.
I can't even imagine that. Because it'd be pretty terrifying doing that and seeing a giant stag or something.
Yeah.
So to see a mythical creature of that magnitude would be quite something.
After the encounter, Richard said, "Tell me that the presence was only the creation of a mind that was accustomed to take too great an interest in such things. I shall not be convinced. Come, rather, with me at the mysterious dusk time when day and night struggle upon the mountains. Feel the night wind on your faces and hear it crying amid the rocks. See the desert uplands consumed before racing storms. Though your nerves be of steel and your mind says it cannot be, you will be acquainted with that fear without a name, that intense dread of the unknown that has pursued mankind from the very dawn of time."
That's badass.
So it's basically, yeah, fine, tell me that I'm wrong. Come with me.
Yeah.
I'll show you. Fuck around and find out.
I feel like he was talking to me there. As I sit over here on my high horse poo-pooing everything.
Yeah, he's talking to you.
He is. Fine. Mr. Sir, I forgot the name of already.
Richard Frere.
Richard Frere. I will come with you. I like that when day and night was a dance upon her fight for whatever it was.
At the mysterious dusk time when day and night struggle upon the mountains.
That's a very cool turn of phrase. Well, fair play.
Something rattled him.
Fair play.
Richard Frere was an author. I couldn't find much information about him personally. He wrote a pretty famous book called Maxwell's Ghost, which was about another author called Gavin Maxwell.
Oh yeah, I think I've heard of that.
I couldn't really find much, and I don't really want to get into Gavin Maxwell for this story, because I've already included more than I probably should have.
I like it. I think, or I should say that I never don't believe these people experienced something. Like, I believe he did see something, and they did have this weird conversation. I just don't believe it's something supernatural, generally, or psychic. But I never think, generally, that these people are lying. Especially when it's everyday people like that. Unlike Derek Akora, who is just lying.
I believe you believe.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a gap in the encounters I was able to find. This was 1948. The next one that I found is from 1977.
I'm curious how recent they'll go. We'll find out by listening.
This is an account from a mountaineer called Tony Marr, and he wrote about his account for UK climbing. And this is his story. And it involves a really interesting feature or landmark that's on the climb to the top of Ben Macdui.
Okay.
Which you're going to love. It's called the Shelter Stone.
Uh-huh.
And it's a big or fairly large cave that's been created by a giant boulder coming away from the main cliff face.
Oh, wow.
And then landing on 4 smaller rocks. So there's space underneath it.
Oh.
And there's so much space you can camp underneath.
Oh, that would be terrifying.
Yeah. But it's like a milestone. Like, people want to visit to stay under the Shelter Stone.
Yeah.
I'll try and post some photos if I remember, but it's really cool.
That is cool.
So they were staying, him and his party were staying under the Shelter Stone on the night that this happened.
Badass.
I was woken by sounds coming from our cooking pots, scratching, rattling noises. The culprits, resident mice, searching for scraps of food. I drifted back to sleep. Later still, I was again roused from my slumbers, this time by another more unexpected sound. The distant rattle of sliding stones.
Oh no, that's not what you want to hear.
Given the time of night, I thought it unlikely to be deer, but could possibly be benighted climbers or walkers looking for this shelter. I lay quietly, eyes shut, but fully awake, listening, expecting to hear voices, but there were none. The sound of sliding scree faded, only to be replaced by the distinctive clonking sound made when granite boulders knocked together. Someone was picking their way through the boulder field towards us. I could make out the sound of a single set of slow, heavy footsteps getting ever closer. No other sounds or voices. Once again, I turned my head towards the approaching sounds, trying to catch sight of torchlight or movement, but again there was nothing. Whatever was making the sounds was now within 10 feet of where I lay. I was beginning to feel tense and uneasy. The hairs on the back of my neck bristled. The footstep sounds I was hearing were unlike anything I had ever heard before. After what seemed like minutes, but but was probably only seconds, the footsteps started again with the same slow, heavy rhythm. Thump, thump, causing some boulders to clonk together. I could feel vibrations from each footstep through the rock slab I was laid on. The footsteps were moving around the outside of the shelter towards the entrance. Although I could not see movement, each footstep was so distinct that I was able to track progress as they neared the entrance. I raised my head and peered past my feet. The entrance was barely discernible, a grey shadow amongst jet blackness. The eerie footsteps stopped at the entrance. Still no torchlight, no sound. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps began again, slow and heavy, but this time they were heading away towards the loch. I listened intently. The sounds eventually faded. As we stood at the rear of the shelter, it became disturbingly clear that the footsteps had come within 6 feet of where we had been lying. In an attempt to recreate the heavy footstep sound, I moved about on the boulders outside while Alan listened. But to our surprise, we found that my 10.5 stone weight was not sufficient to produce the sound. We turned our attention to creating the sound of clonking boulders. Again, we quickly discovered that to create a similar sound required the combined weight of 2 of us to knock the boulders together. We were all confused. What on earth had passed by during the night?
That would be horrifying. Was it like a bear?
They don't know.
Why would could there be a bear?
There are no bears.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, there are no bears in Scotland.
Oh.
So to be clear, he heard these things through the night.
Yep.
I didn't include this. He woke up the next morning and he started telling everyone he'd had a really weird night.
Uh-huh.
And he found that one of his other companions had heard the same noises.
Oh, you'd be so relieved because you'd feel mental if not.
They both had that moment of realising they both heard the same thing. And that was when they went outside the shelter stone cave to try and replicate the noises, to try and figure out what they had heard and seen. So they realised that the figure must have been 6 feet away because someone stayed lying down in the cave and the other person stood to try and match what they had seen.
Oh, yeah.
And realised it had to have been that close.
The second person sort of confirms it wasn't like a dream or anything as well.
And yeah, they couldn't replicate the noises themselves. They were too light.
Oh.
So whatever it was bigger than these men.
What could it have been? I don't know. What could it have been?
I told you you weren't going to know.
I'm so intrigued. And I'm not going to get answers and it's going to frustrate me. I can tell.
We have some theories. They might itch that part of your brain.
I'm looking forward to theories.
Now, I've saved one of the most famous encounters for last. And it's the story of Alexander Tewnion. It's Tewnion. I'm happy to hear how I should be pronouncing that. Please tell me.
Tonion. Don't know.
Alexander. This happened in 1943, so before Peter Densham and Richard Frere. But this is one of the most famous encounters, so I thought I would just save it.
Quite right.
He was a mountaineer, and he published a shocking account of his big grey man encounter in the Scots magazine in 1958. So again, like 15 years later.
Yeah.
So he said, I spent a 10-day leave climbing alone in the Cairngorms. So remember, this is wartime.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 43. One afternoon, just as I reached the summit cairn of Ben Macdui, mist swirled across the Lairig Grew and enveloped the mountain. So remember, that's the pass. The atmosphere became dark and oppressive. A fierce, bitter wind whisked among the boulders, and an odd sound echoed through the mist. A loud footstep, it seemed. So once again, more footsteps.
More footsteps.
Then another, and another. A strange shape loomed up, receded, and came charging at me. Without hesitation, I whipped out the revolver and fired 3 times at the figure. When it still came on, I turned and hared down the path, reaching Glenderry in a time that I have never bettered. You may ask, was it really Fear Lamore? Frankly, I think it was.
Oh, man.
He was so scared that he shot at whatever he saw.
That's so unusual for like a British story.
To have a gun.
To have a gun on you.
But for people who believe in the big grey man, this is held up as considerable proof because whatever he saw scared him so badly that he shot at it to kill it.
Well, there was clearly something in front of him. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so interesting. More footsteps. What could it be?
Well, we have some theories.
Oh, thank God.
Which I think might make you feel better. Yeah. Our first theory is fog.
Just some fog.
Just fog.
Just fog.
I had to put on my science hat for this theory because I read a lot of conflicting information. So maybe the physicist in you might be able to help me out. I don't know.
Cam.
The theory I read initially is that sound gets amplified in fog. Mm-hmm. So if deer or other normal wildlife were around, their steps would be amplified. So it would sound louder and closer than they really were, and people might think it was the big grey man.
Oh, okay.
However, the base fact that fog amplifies sound isn't true, or isn't always true from what I read.
Yeah.
Because that's not how fog works.
It's not something I've heard.
No. Well, here's the research I did. It's going to make you happy because it's based in science.
Appreciate you.
Fog isn't solid.
Yes.
You know, maybe you've encountered fog before. You know you can walk through it.
You don't bounce off of it.
Yeah, it's not solid. Fog is made up of lots of tiny drops of water.
Uh-huh.
And when sound travels through water, it behaves differently to how it travels through air.
Yes.
It does this to light as well. But it seems like sound is not amplified in fog. It actually gets muffled and distorted. And because it's moving through air and then water and then air and water, it gets spread around in a strange way.
Oh.
Which makes it hard to tell where specific sounds are coming from.
Oh.
Because it doesn't travel normally. It gets bounced around more.
That's interesting.
So, I mean, one thing that might explain why people say fog amplifies sound is to do with how cold and warm air meet in fog, and then sound can bounce off this barrier and reflect, and it's a whole thing I don't understand. But from what I can see, it might explain some of it, that sounds become distorted and more strange when it's foggy.
Yeah.
And you can't tell where sounds are coming from. So it could disorientate you, or you could think that something sounds closer than it is, or in a direction where no one should be, even though they aren't really there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder if because it kind of jumbles up the sound and spreads it out more, you then get interference.
Maybe.
So, I can't remember when we talked about this in one of the episodes this season. The constructive interference where the waves meet would make it louder in some parts and quieter in other parts.
Maybe that's what people mean. I just couldn't understand it because I tried to look in, because I saw a lot of articles saying fog amplifies sound. I was like, well, I don't understand how that works, so I can't explain it to people if I don't know how that happens. No. And then I couldn't find anything that says fog amplifies sound.
It's almost like an urban myth.
Yeah, I found the opposite, that it becomes muffled and it's harder to hear when it's foggy.
I would have thought it would be sound dampening more than sound amplifying.
It seems to be. But I wonder, because it's sound moving through water, I wonder if people have got confused because fog isn't solid. But when sound travels through solid water, then it is amplified and it can travel further.
Yes, that's true.
So maybe there's cross wires here.
Yeah, just having been in fog, it's not obvious enough that things get louder.
No, but it is confusing.
Yes.
Sounds are confusing. So yeah, maybe people who aren't used to foggy conditions have been up Ben Macdui, and normal sounds become supernatural sounds because people don't know what to make of them and can't find them.
There might be also an element of if you're a bit lost, because if it's really foggy, you just get a bit disorientated and a bit bamboozled. So you get a bit freaked out, and then you start hearing slightly unusual things, and it kind of amplifies it. Yeah. And you get just in a big spiral of panic almost. It makes you just go, whoa.
Theory number 2 that's been put forward to explain the big grey man is altitude sickness.
That's what I'm curious about.
So if you don't know, when you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain, like at high altitudes where the air is thinner, there's less oxygen there, you can start hallucinating and you stop being able to think straight because your brain isn't getting enough oxygen. Fairly common knowledge.
Yep.
However, Ben Macdui is not tall enough for climbers to be affected by altitude sickness.
I didn't think it was.
I've looked into it. I've done the research. Ben Macdui, like I said, is 1,309 metres tall. Altitude sickness generally happens above 2,500 metres because of the levels of oxygen you have at that altitude.
Yeah, so it's not even close to being high enough.
I will say that I read humans operate optimally when we're below 150 metres.
Okay, that makes sense.
Ben Macdui is substantially taller than that.
Yes.
So maybe it has an impact, but it's not nearly as severe as what you would experience in the Himalayas.
Yeah.
For example.
And like that altitude of Ben Macdui is lower than Denver.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I'm pretty sure Denver is 1,600 metres above sea level. And it's not full of ghosts or anything.
Well, no, it's not tall enough for altitude sickness to be a real problem. Anything above 8,000 metres or 26,000 feet is known as the death zone. That's where your body starts dying if you don't have oxygen with you. So really, you're looking at altitudes that are considerably taller than Ben Macdui is.
Yeah. I'm glad to have that confirmed because that's what I thought was the case. I don't think that's a factor. That's not a good theory to me.
I can see why people would think it, because altitude sickness is the thing.
You would just kind of offhandedly go, oh, maybe it was altitude sickness, if you didn't know the data, so to speak.
So I checked.
Yeah, so I can see where it comes from, but I'm more compelled by the fog of the two theories.
Yeah. Another explanation is down purely to the geography of the cairngorms. I talked a lot at the beginning about how Ben Macdui is rounded and open at the summit. And a lot of the landscape around Ben Macdui is all very similar, and there aren't as many markers identifying different spots as you would expect.
Okay.
So it's very easy to get disorientated in the cairngorms. You really need to know where you're going, and you have to navigate carefully. It's easy to get lost.
That makes sense.
The summits don't look like summits.
Yes.
So maybe people are getting lost and scared. They don't really know where they are. They're exhausted, stressed. Maybe this answers for the creation of the big grey man in climbers' minds.
That's what I was wondering. It's kind of similar to what I said in the fog with that.
Yeah.
And because although it's not that high a mountain in terms of all the world's mountains, you're still going to be pretty tired at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still a hell of a climb.
Yeah, and even as an experienced climber, like it's still going to be, like it's a difficult task. It's not easy to do. So if you are overtired and maybe, I don't know, you're not feeling very well or you haven't been eating properly, you might go a bit loopy or you'll just become a bit more vulnerable. Yeah.
In Patrick Baker's book on the cairngorms, which I mentioned, he writes about this and he says it better than I do. So I'm gonna read what he says. It seems only natural that the mountain environment should affect us. Isolation, solitude, topography, terrain, and even weather can significantly influence our perception of a place and consequently inform our responses to a particular set of surroundings. Altered sensory stimulation can affect our emotional reasoning and rational processing. In unfamiliar or extreme conditions, feelings can become heightened and abstracted, blurring physical and psychological realities. So I think he says it pretty well.
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah.
I feel he's put everything I wanted to say into words.
Right, me too. We should have just read his book for this episode.
That would have been easier, eh?
Baker also talks about something called third man syndrome.
Ooh. What's this?
Well, remember we were talking about Peter and Richard talking to someone.
Oh, yes, yes.
Around the cairn. Mm-hmm. This is one of the things I think might be responsible. And it's third man syndrome. It's really interesting. Baker references the expedition of Ernest Shackleton to the Antarctic by sea. when he's talking about third man syndrome. And this was the expedition where their ship got trapped by packed ice and they had to escape the ship or die.
Yes.
The Endurance expedition. Mm-hmm. You probably know it, it's very famous. Shackleton and some of his crew they managed to get off the ship and the ship sank. They made it to Elephant Island in the ship's boats. Shackleton and 2 of his crew members had to go and find help for those who they left behind on Elephant Island. They didn't all venture into South Georgia. So they're walking across the Antarctic alone, the 3 of them.
Crazy.
You should check out the story if you're interested. They're travelling by foot, and Shackleton remembers that they really felt as if someone was there with them. But this was a benevolent presence, so it felt calming and reassuring.
Well, that's nice.
This is what Shackleton said. When I look back at those days, I have no doubt that Providence guided us, not only across the snowfields, but across the storm-white sea that separated Elephant Island from our landing place on South Georgia. I know that during that long and racking march of 36 hours over the unnamed mountains and glaciers of South Georgia, it seemed to me often that we were 4, not 3. So it's different to the experiences of the big grey man, because we talked about it, that his presence seems to be threatening.
Yep.
Whereas with third man syndrome, it's usually a kind or comforting presence that people feel.
That's so unusual.
And he's not the only one to have experienced it.
No.
Frank Smythe was an English mountaineer who attempted to climb Everest in 1933, but he couldn't summit. I'm not really sure what the conditions were, but he had to come back down before reaching the top. He was on his way back down, and he was so sure that there was someone there with him that he was offering them his food, asking if they wanted some. And there was no one there.
That's bizarre. That is so bizarre. I've never heard of anything like that before.
Right? It's like something that you create to comfort yourself.
Yeah.
That you're not alone.
Whoa.
Patrick Baker, he talks about malevolent presences. More like the big grey man. So these are pleasant feelings you have of someone there looking after you. And he talks about the bad ones. And he says, but while most accounts of an unexplained presence are reported as helpful and benign, John Geiger, who's another writer, also details occasions, most notably amidst the blank expanses of the polar expeditions, where the presence has been a more sinister, even malevolent manifestation. Like the many instances of spectral companions which have been recorded by the explorers of other featureless places, aviators, astronauts and deep-sea divers, simply be a neural projection, the mind's attempt to populate the mountain's unfamiliar empty spaces.
Well, that does... I was initially thinking that Ben Macdui doesn't seem as extreme as these other places. I've never climbed it, so I can't super comment. But if it's about the kind of featurelessness, having seen photos of the...
Well, it's empty.
Terrain, like it is that empty.
So you get so unsettled by the emptiness that you create something to fill it.
Yeah.
And it's a phenomenon that's been recorded in lots of other places.
Oh, that is so interesting.
Right?
So interesting.
Then he goes on and he talks about other things that would sort of stimulate your brain if you were climbing to create something like that. He talks about the foreboding hum of metallic climbing gear in the moments before an electrical storm.
Ooh.
The hypoxic delusions born of oxygen-thin air, or the intensely dry and ionized foehn winds, which are said to provoke episodes of madness. So these are all things that climbers would experience that are totally normal.
Yeah.
They could happen to anyone, but they would make you really uneasy.
Yeah. I had no idea there's so many other kind of dangers with climbing.
Yeah.
Or challenges, I should say.
Well, even
they're
just
not
psychologically.
Yeah, they're not necessarily dangers, but there's a lot of sinister mind games at work.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think of this theory, that it's like a psychological response to the geography of the place?
I like it. I like that a lot.
I think it's the one I like the best.
Yeah. Especially if you add in the monotony of just walking walking for hours, maybe just staring at your feet, quite tired. So you're like, yeah, just keep walking, just keep going, and you're not really thinking about anything else. And then there's nothing else around you, and you're by yourself. It could breed madness.
It's really creepy.
Yeah.
I think it's really unsettling. But I like it as a theory.
I like that as a theory a lot. Echoing footsteps that you mentioned, or you mentioned it that it was a woman who thought her footsteps were echoing, was something I thought for some of the a potential theory of like rock faces and stuff.
Well, it's interesting when you consider what fog can do to sound.
Yeah.
That it might come back to you in a strange way. Because her thing was that it didn't match the rhythm of her footsteps.
Yes.
So I wonder if that's a factor, that it was foggy. Although I don't think in her account she talked about fog.
No.
I don't know.
But it's interesting how sound can misbehave.
Yeah.
So to speak.
And even when there's no sound to misbehave, just your brain.
Yeah. Come on, brain. I thought I could count on you.
I know. So for theory number 3, because I have more, do you remember Hugh Rankin?
Yes.
Captain Hugh Rankin. Well, we're coming back to him and his Buddhist beliefs.
Oh, yes, he heard Sanskrit.
Yes, for this next theory. And I have a book to read from for this, because it's Kieran's favourite thing.
Story time.
This is from The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui.
Oh.
By Affleck Gray.
Very good, very good.
It's like giving a presentation to the class,
I
eh?
know.
Now, he has a whole chapter, which I'm not going to read you the whole thing, about the Bodhisattva.
Easy for you to say.
Bodhisattva.
Okay, yeah.
It's Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva. So here we go. The belief is resolutely held among some followers of the Buddhist or allied religion in this country that Ben Macdui is the haunt of a particularly holy or perfect being of the Buddhist faith.
Oh.
And that levitated Tibetan lamas regularly meet in a cave on Ben Macdui to discuss the destinies of the world.
Huh. So, levitated lamas, does that mean they meet there kind of while meditating? Or do they
I think so. I'm not too sure.
I'm assuming that's what it means, as opposed to they physically go there to meet
Yeah,
up.
I think it's more of a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
But he goes on. The Reverend Countess of Mayo, mystic and leader of the Active Truth Academy, Edinburgh, with whom I had some correspondence in connection with the subject of the Grey Man, vis-à-vis the levitated Tibetan lamas who were to have held a publicised rendezvous with her on Ben Macdui in 1960, gives credence to such a belief, and enjoined me, call your book The Golden Big White Men of Ben Macdui, and lift yourself and your readers out of the negative vibrations of fear and terror.
Sounds nice.
So it's a belief that the Big Grey Man is a divine creature and one of the 5 perfect beings that exist in Buddhist religion.
Wow. That's quite incredible.
Unusually.
Yeah, I wonder why it seems so malevolent.
I don't know. Before this book, Affleck Gray spoke to Hugh Rankin about his experience. So I thought you might want to hear it.
Please.
He declared emphatically that he was not talking bunkum in claiming that both he and Lady Rankin, his wife, had not only seen the presence, but had actually talked with him in the past. They instantly recognised him as Bodhisattva, one of the 5 perfected men who control the destinies of this world, and meet once a year in a cave in the Himalayas. They have lived through billions of years of life, and so are disposed to be friendly to ordinary mortals. Sir Hugh resented the popular description of these men as abominable snowmen. Snowmen, yes, he asserted, but benevolent snowmen. Sir Hugh believed that this particular Bodhisattva lives permanently in the Cairngorms, probably on the plateau of Ben Macdui.
That's cool.
So it ties in with his Buddhist beliefs.
Yeah, that's a very unusual take on it. I wonder if you then take that as truth. The malevolence people feel is actually a feeling of inadequacy from being around
Being in awe.
a perfect being.
Maybe.
It would be hard to feel good about yourself.
Or maybe they don't want to be bothered.
Oh, yeah, or maybe they're just like, I'm meditating.
Leave.
Piss off.
But he goes on, And he says the presence, because he talks about what the presence looked like. They had an encounter, they saw the big grey man, they met him. The presence then addressed us, in Sanskrit, I think. I could not understand what he was saying, but I replied in Urdu, the only Eastern language I know. I said, I bow to the Lord Bodhisattva, who rules the destinies of the world. As the presence spoke, most beneficent and peaceful rays of light seemed to exude from him. So he's talking about this like a divine experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, he goes on. That's not his entire account. He talks a lot about hearing a heavenly host of voices and bagpipes playing. It's like meeting an angel.
Yeah.
That's how he talks about the big grey man. And that's one of the theories, that he's this perfect being.
Well, that is not a theory I expected.
I didn't think you would.
That's taking me by surprise.
You seem surprised.
I am.
You're very quiet.
Yeah,
Uncharacteristically so.
It's a very unusual account he describes. Mm-hmm. That's similar to the long-toed being.
The talons.
Yeah, the talons. Like, it's so grand and perfect an experience. I'm just like, no, that didn't happen. Why you and nobody else ever? Seems strange.
Mm-hmm. But it's a theory.
It's a theory. Can't argue with it being a theory.
In this vein, other people believe that the big grey man is some kind of interdimensional being, and that Ben Macdui is itself like home of a portal. So he's the guardian of the portal, and he travels between dimensions.
Yes.
Fully believe?
100%.
In the episode?
Yep, that's got to be it. That is our best theory across every episode ever.
Well, some people disagree with this, but are thinking aliens.
I wondered if aliens were going to come up.
I don't know if aliens have really come up on the podcast before.
Not hugely, no.
But people believe aliens.
Well, if it's going to be an interdimensional portal guarding being, why not be an alien? You know? Why not be one of the good Buddhist gods, sort of? You've lost me. You've lost me.
Well, Affleck Gray actually interviewed a man called Reverend Dr. George King, who's the founder of the Enquiries Society.
That's cool.
George had been a taxi driver until he was... Let me find it. Yeah. George had been a taxi driver until he was, quote, made aware that he was to become the primary mental channel of the space intelligences that he had. And apparently, up until then, he had had no mystical experiences.
Well, there you go. That's unusual.
He said, a stream of energy was sent through me out into the world, and also into the very rocks below my feet.
Was he smoking something when he had this thought?
I have no proof of that. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, that seems unlikely. That seems unlikely.
But he seems to think that he wrote a booklet called My Contact with the Great White Brotherhood, which sounds like a white supremacist group. I'm just going to come out and say it.
Oh, I'm definitely a bit culty.
He describes how, with the assistance of carefully chosen mountain teams, he travelled through the British Isles, across the American continent, Australia and New Zealand, finally to finish his gigantic task on a slab of reddish-brown rock overlooking the Chamonix Valley in France. During these travels, I was used as an essential link in the chain between interplanetary intelligence and this Earth, so that 18 mountains could be charged throughout the world.
Well, if we don't get our mountains charged, they're going to go flat.
Yes.
And people are going to be annoyed.
Yes. It's very odd. Even just looking at it all again, I'm confused.
Yeah, that's a bit out there.
But one of the mountains that was charged, in whatever way they did this, I'm not hugely certain, was a mountain 3 miles northwest of Ben Macdui.
Oh, okay, not Ben Macdui itself.
I don't think so. They said a holy rock was painted with the Enquiries Society symbol. And in 1961, Dr. King claimed to have been contacted by a member of the Great White Brotherhood. and enjoyed a unique experience and contact with one of the most important Great White Brotherhood retreats in the world. This was a huge dome-shaped auditorium in the bowels of Ben Macdui, accompanied by many other beings, some of whom were tending advanced radionic recording apparatus of a type undreamed of by ordinary mankind.
It hurts my brain.
I didn't think you'd manage this one particularly well.
I'm not vibing.
Like an alien dome in a mountain.
Yeah. What?
Charging mountains with power.
What are you even saying, sir?
Well, see, I was reluctant even to share this with you because I don't understand it.
I appreciate you sharing all the theories.
Like, I don't really understand. But I appreciate Affleck Gray going and talking to these people.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing it up now for the listeners. Even if they're just enjoying my bewilderment.
I think that is what most people stay for.
Come for the history, stay for Kieran's rage.
And to Affleck's credit, he does actually go into, in quite a lot of detail, the possibility and viability of alien life in our closest surrounding stars or possible solar systems. Yeah, not talking about Ben Macdui specifically, but he talks about our closest star and the viability of there being planets with life, the odds of that being true, what scientists have discovered. He goes into detail.
Fair play.
So he's not necessarily backing up George King, but he's talking about the viability of life outside the planet.
I appreciate the due diligence to explore the theory completely. Yeah. He sounds batshit. I'm just going to say it.
George King.
Yes, no, not Affleck Gray.
Yeah.
George King seems...
There were sort of cult vibes.
Very culty. Please pay to find out more.
Yeah, it was very strange. I do not believe it whatsoever.
Neither do I.
But it's something that has been said.
Yeah, I don't even know. How do you even go from being a taxi driver to doing that?
I don't know.
How does that happen? What has gone on? Maybe it's another case of what happens when there's too much monotony.
A psychic break. I don't know. Naturally, another theory that's put forward is ley lines, which I still don't understand.
Oh, yes.
Love have explained to me.
Mm-hmm.
And these lines, apparently, they meet or cross at mountains, or they go through mountains, so ley lines.
Sure.
Another theory, though, is infrasound.
Infrasound. I was wondering about infrasound ever since you've brought it up.
We talked about it initially in the Socky Poltergeist episode.
It was that one, wasn't it?
Which was our very first episode this season.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sound that's usually below 20 hertz. Although some sources I was looking at say this isn't the case because some humans can hear below 20 hertz.
Oh, yeah?
So it's not technically infrasound.
Well, that's pretty cool.
That's the definition I'm going off. But basically, it's just sound that's so low you can't really hear it and it makes you uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And it can have like a physical impact on your body. So some people believe that the strong winds that you get at the top of Ben Macdui create infrasound with the way that it plays off the environment, and that's what makes people so uncomfortable.
That I would believe. Or like,
it's definitely feasible.
Earth tremors underneath reverberating up kind of thing.
See, that's the thing with several of these theories, at least a couple of them could be true at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of a compounding of different factors all coming together.
I actually discovered in my research that there have been deaths caused by people standing too close to speakers at concerts.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is to do with that infrasound.
Wow.
There have been there's certain people that are more vulnerable. If you're like very tall and very thin, and if you smoke.
Oh, okay. Only 2 out of 3.
You're more vulnerable. But people who stand too close to subwoofers, which is like that's what releases the bass.
That's the bass, yeah.
Their lungs have collapsed.
Whoa!
Because of this sound and like it being really loud.
Yeah,
that's the thing that's happened. So it does have an impact on you.
It's almost like the high pitched sound shattering glass.
Yeah,
low enough to just collapse your lungs.
Yeah.
Oh,
isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. That's mental.
And a lot of people believe this theory because the big grey man isn't really seen by many people. He's felt. So infrasound makes you feel strange.
Yes.
So it could be an explanation.
Yeah, I like that as a theory as well. For not all the time, but as another theory.
Right.
So interesting.
Obviously, there's the theory, which we've touched on, that the big grey man is a Bigfoot.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Some people believe that it's a very similar creature.
Mm-hmm.
There was one photographer, John A. Rennie, who took some photos of what were supposedly the big grey man's footprints left in the snow.
Interesting.
But the reason I didn't bring these up as an encounter is because these were proven to not be footprints at all.
Oh.
They looked like footprints, but they were caused by rain falling and eroding snow away in strange patches that made it look like footprints.
Fair play. Fair play. Yeah, I don't think it's a foot. Because, well, the argument for in America there being a Bigfoot, because like the national parks are ridiculously huge and the forests are truly wild. Scotland's not that big. And the cairngorms aren't that big or very well covered.
But even if there was going to be a Bigfoot type creature in Scotland, there are lots of big forests where that could happen. I don't believe it's going to be on a big empty mountain.
Yeah, if it was on the mountain, you'd be able to see it. Where would it hide, you know? So I don't think a Bigfoot, personally.
Fair. We have our last theory.
Saving the best for last?
Yes, to me. This was the most interesting, because I have a photo to show you. I'll cue it up. Last theory is the Brocken Spectre theory.
Oh.
Have you heard of this before? The Brocken Spectre?
Nope.
It's very cool. It's a phenomenon that was discovered way back in 1780 in Germany. And it's basically a massive optical illusion that can happen when you're in the mountains.
Oh.
You're basically, the sun has to be at a low angle for this to work. There's lots of conditions that need to be in place for it to happen. The sun needs to be very low. There needs to be lots of cloud, like big cloud banks. And this illusion, this spectre, is created when the sun is behind you, shining onto this cloud bank. And it casts this ginormous shadow onto the clouds that becomes distorted, and it creates like a figure. And the figure's head has this like rainbow halo around it.
Whoa.
And it's really strange. It's so immense, it's quite scary to look at, because the shadow is massive, because it's your shadow cast onto a huge cloud bank.
Yeah.
And the shadow can look like it's moving independently because the clouds are moving.
Oh.
And it's meeting like water droplets and air, which, like seeing the clouds like that, it can mess with your depth perception, which makes it look even stranger. So some people think that people have seen a Brocken Spectre and think it's the big grey man.
Well, that's cool.
I do have a photo for you to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about.
How do you spell Brocken if people want to look it up?
Brocken.
Oh, wow. That is so cool.
Right?
Wowee. Yeah, that would be quite startling to see.
Mm-hmm.
It is just as you described it. A very big shadow of a figure.
But it's quite immense. It's huge.
Oh, yeah, it's about the size.
And there's lots of different photos
of
out there of like the shadow appearing at closer distance, so it makes it look bigger, different angles. But it's because it's cast in a way you wouldn't expect. So some people look at it and don't realise it's their shadow.
Yeah. You wouldn't. It looks, in this photo, it looks too far away to even conceive that it might be your shadow.
Well, that and the halo in some of the photos I saw makes it look as if the sun's behind it.
Oh, yeah, right enough.
So if you're not really thinking, disorientated, and you think the sun is behind this thing, it's not a shadow.
Yeah.
Because shadows don't get cast in front of the sun.
Yes, absolutely. That would be startling, to say the least. I had no idea. That's brand new to me. I've never heard of that.
I thought you would enjoy it.
And it's interesting going with your man who was like, oh, if you don't believe me, come up with me. And you experience the point between night and day.
Richard Frere.
Yes. Because that's when the sun is low and there might be cloud, and you get shit like that. So
if you imagine the combination of circumstances that the sun is low in Scotland in the autumn and winter months. There's also a lot of snow on the ground during the autumn winter months. Inclement weather, fog, crunchy snow, falling rocks. All of it together makes a quite compelling argument for the big grey man being lots of strange but natural circumstances.
it would be very overwhelming if you did get caught in this perfect storm of environmental factors to have them all happen at once.
Yeah.
That is weird. That's just Googling Brock Inspector into Google Images. Quite unreal. And it is very, like, Messiah-like.
Yeah, it looks otherworldly.
And very much like a figure.
Mm-hmm. But that is the crazy story of the big grey man of Ben Macdui.
You suspected I would like this episode, and I fucking loved it.
Really? Aw, I'm so glad.
So interesting. And I think it's the most compelling theories we've had to explain these things.
I believe a couple of them.
Yeah. And especially because it's a modern phenomena. A modern, I don't know the word, fairy, monster, legend, as opposed to some of them which are hundreds, if not thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm.
So to have it so new, but then to now have a deeper understanding of how these environmental factors work, super interesting.
I love that it's come about from that era of beginning to venture into mountaineering.
Yes.
It's a topic I didn't really know much about.
No.
But I'm really interested in. It's coming from that era of exploration and adventure.
Yeah, because I guess before kind of this, your first Mr. Colley, it wouldn't have been a hobby.
Well, no, you had other things that you had to do in your time. You couldn't just climb mountains for fun.
Yeah. You could suddenly had free time, which you could use. So it's super interesting. And yeah, I've been really interested in mountaineering as an outsider. Who knows? Maybe I'll go climb a mountain.
As an equipment enthusiast.
Yep. Well, you didn't disappoint. I enjoyed that immensely. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed if you're listening.
Yes.
A little bit different for us, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Unusual.
And we have 2 more episodes to go.
Yeah, only 2.
Only 2 episodes left of season 4. The time's flown in.
It really has. It does not feel like we should be at the end of another season.
No, absolutely not. Well, we shall jump over to Patreon.
Yes, you can come join us on Monday, 5 p.m. That's when we release all of our wee blethers, where we break down our thoughts on episodes. We chat more about what's going on in our day-to-day life. It's super fun.
Yep.
You should come join us.
We're going to talk about John Krakauer's Into Thin Air.
Ooh.
The Hooker and Brown Mountains.
Ooh.
14 Peaks documentary.
Ooh.
And his experience meeting a Yeti. It's going to be great.
And it's a great way to support the podcast.
Yes, it is.
But just listening and being here is enough. We appreciate you.
We do.
And we'll be back next week.
We will indeed. Bye.
Bye.